So we're going to be talking about three main concepts today, which are going to be tempo, value, and multiplicative scaling. I'm certain that all of you have heard these phrases used from time to time at some point or the other. But today we'll be doing a little bit, hopefully be clarifying some doubts and dispelling some notions. And more importantly, seeing how you can actually apply these concepts effectively rather than just knowing about them in the abstract, right? So let's get going, I guess. Cool. So what is tempo and value, right? What do these words mean? We'll get to multiplicative scaling in a sec, but first I just want to establish what do these things even mean in terms of tempo and value. By the way, if you have any questions, feel free to note them down after every slide or every big explanation, etc. I'll just ask around for questions rather than all at the end. So that, because each part of the presentation is going to depend on the last concept, right? So if you have any doubts early on, yeah, just let me know. I don't know, think if there's a raise hand feature, but yeah, whatever, you get it. Cool. What does tempo mean? What does value mean, right? Tempo and value are two terms that are dialectic, and by that I mean that the meaning of them comes from each other, not exactly in opposition, right? It's not dichotomy exactly, but often enough they do, in a soft sense, figure dichotomously. What do we mean by that? What we mean by that is they often stand opposing to each other in terms of when you maximize for one of these things, you end up taking a loss in the other thing, right? How does that make any sense? Well, that's because the definitions of these games are not limited to TFT, right? These terms have existed for a long, long time. Tempo, in fact, has existed as long as chess has existed, or at least, I don't know, since studying chess has existed. Value is a more newer concept, I suppose, right? But regardless, I think value, etymologically, stems from Magic the Gathering. But since then, both of these terms have been used in strategy games of all kinds, right? This has been appropriated towards card games like Hearthstone, Magic the Gathering, RTS games, even League of Legends uses the concepts of tempo and value. I don't know how many of you play League or anything like that, but all of these games utilize tempo and value. So, what are they? Well, to define first, tempo, both of these terms have to do with resources and how you are utilizing them, right? Tempo essentially means how you are utilizing your resource right now, immediately, right? Now, that resource can vary based on what it is, and we'll get to specific examples so you can understand that better. So, for example, if you want, and value in opposition, value is kind of easier to understand in the sense it is how much value you are getting out of your resources, right? Now, you may be wondering, how can you get more value out of certain resources on account of, well, a gold is a gold is a gold. That's not entirely true, right? We know for a fact that, let's say you start a game with, let's say it's 2-1 in this example, and you have 10 gold, right? The highest tempo thing that you can do in this scenario is immediately spending all of your gold. You roll down, you hit your strongest board immediately. Maybe you 2-star some units, right? Now you've spent your gold. It's maximum tempo because you've utilized your resources in making your board right now as strong as it is right now in this moment, right? The highest value thing to do in this case would be to sell your entire board. Don't even field a board, maybe make 20, right? The reason that it is because then your money is generating more value, right? Each gold isn't exactly worth 1 gold. Each gold in that sense, rather than being worth, let's say 1.1 gold, because each gold is generating 0.1 extra gold, right? Since we get 1 econ for every 10 gold we make. Now, each gold is worth essentially 1.2 gold. And then exponentially, maybe even more, right? Because then we make 30 sooner, make 40 sooner, make 50 sooner, etc., etc. However, as TFT players, we understand that neither of those things are optimal to play, right? Sure, maybe, you can argue that in some cases opening is correct and selling your entire board, but generally speaking, it is not great to go too far into either of these ends, right? When we end up maximizing too much for tempo, what often happens is that we become strong in the moment, and you might streak for all of stage 2, you might even streak for all of stage 3, but the people who've been maximizing a little bit more for value will eventually be able to reach a point where they outvalue you. Their board eventually, when they finally end up using their gold, they're going to be stronger than you, right? Conversely, what also can happen is when you maximize entirely for value, you might even die before you hit that spot, right? Or what might happen in TFT, what often does happen is that you might end up creating an insanely strong board. You might be able to pull off that successful fast 9, 4-2, you went 9, you hit your entire board, you hit Vex 2, Graves 2, and then you end up dying to some other player who has like 2 Space Groove emblems anyway, right? So we understand that it's not, generally speaking, optimal to maximize either of these while ignoring the other, right? Um, this concept also applies to item slams and not just gold, right? So again, when it comes to tempo, this is why we often say just slam your item right now, right? In TFT, it is a little bit more optimal to maximize your resources towards, when it comes to items, towards tempo rather than value, right? This is a concept that we often teach players who are slightly weaker, because what these players often end up doing is having like 5+ components on their bench and are too afraid to slam it because they want to make bis on every single unit. We're taught in TFT that it doesn't matter and you should be slamming items more aggressively because that'll make you save more HP, right? And the net loss that you get in terms of the value lost when it comes to when it comes to maximizing for tempo in this case, when you slam an item, let's say you slammed a Trojan as opposed to a blue buff, the net loss over there is generally considered worth it to be able, like the HP that you save, right? So the two things, all of this to say, in which tempo and value most applies when it comes to TFT is going to be gold and it's going to be items, right? And your slams. Now, when it comes to tempo, we've all had games where we think the playstyle that is called quote unquote tempo Timmy, right? Where we've had games where we tried to tempo Timmy and it didn't quite work out, right? You'll be streaking, you'll be 100 streaking, you've slammed your items aggressively, everything's going very well, but you end up like bleeding out to a 6th, right? Why does that actually happen? What is it that is causing us to not be able to convert our early game lead into a late game good finish, right? Because often enough, the game plan of tempo Timmy is recognizing that somewhere in the lobby, someone is going to hit a giga cap board, and you're not going to be able to keep up with it. So rather than optimizing for value alongside someone else and taking the gamble of who's going to be actually stronger at the end of the game, you're basically just saying, it's all good, I'll play to conserve my HP, and then eventually I'll bleed out, hopefully get a top 4, maybe a third, in an extremely good case a second. But sometimes we just end up going 6th, right? This is where we can talk a little bit about multiplicative scaling and how that applies to TFT. Now, again, I'm certain that this is a term that every single one of us has encountered while playing TFT before, right? What does multiplicative scaling mean? Multiplicative scaling, at its basest form, in the easiest to understand form, is the idea that you want to take resources or stats on a unit from multiple different buckets or categories in order to maximize the amount of value that you're getting from them, right? Now, what does this mean? And how do we know that this is true? Well, let's say that there are 2 dimensions of value, right? It is how hard I slap you and how often I slap you, right? Let's say the power of a slap is a 1 and how often I slap you is 10 times in 10 seconds. So once every second, right? If I increase my power to 2, now I'm slapping you for a net total of 20 damage, right? And if I now increase the rate and I also twice double that, then that's also going to be basically dealing you 20 damage because I'll be giving you 2 slaps every second. Now, we understand that when we add 1, right? Now, let's suppose that we add 1 more power to this bucket, right? Of how hard I'm slapping you. Then our power is at a 3, whereas we're still slapping once every second. That nets us a total of 30 damage. And in the opposite case as well, if I increase the speed by 1, then of course I'm also slapping you for 30 damage. However, when it came to allocating that second point, if rather than allocating in the same bucket, we'd gone for the other bucket, then I would be slamming you twice a second for 2 damage, netting us a total of 40 damage. So, in a tangible TFT case, how we understand this is in terms of you want items from different categories, right? This is why we often say that you should build JG, build Rabidons, because the main ways, let's say, for an AP unit to scale is mana generation, it's going to be crit, it's going to be damage amp, and it's going to be AP itself, right? AD units function exactly the same, except instead of AP, it's AD, and instead of mana gen, it's going to be attack speed, right? How often they auto, because they also deal damage on their autos. So these are the 4 ways in which we can make our carry strong. Tanks function very much the same way, in which you want different kinds of stats on them, right? So if you are building for a tank, you want some of armor MR, you want some HP, and you want some damage reduction, right? Tanks only have 3 scaling things because their mana generation and how often they ult rarely matters. Like, there's going to be exceptions to the case, right? The one unit where it does actually matter is like Nunu, but that's because Nunu has like a very extremely it's a fight altering ult, right? A large part of the power budget of Nunu in our current state applies to the ult and how often it ults, right? But it's not necessarily scaling Nunu's tankiness. Okay, so we understand now what multiplicative scaling is when it comes to units. This also obviously applies not only to items, but also to traits, right? As we understand, for example, brawlers already get bonus HP. Hence, building a lot of HP on them might not seem optimal, right? And that's why we want to build damage reduction and armor and MR. However, this is where we end up coming into exception cases, right? And let me actually move on to the most important slide of today, which is how do we apply this to our world games? Now, we're going to get a little bit specific, and I'm going to ask you to like imagine a few scenarios. Now, we understand tempo, we understand value, and we understand multiplicative scaling in terms of how to itemize our units such that they are as efficient as they can be in terms of outputting the damage, right? Most people don't actually look at these things. However, these things become self-evident when you look at stats, right? When you look at the stats for, let's say, a unit like, I don't know, someone who's like a Bastion, who's a Bastion, Ramus, right? You'll already know that the stats will represent that the items that give you HP are going to perform better than that. The delta is going to be strictly better. However, a lot of people leave multiplicative scaling and the idea of this at that and forget to apply it to the larger concept of their TFT game as a whole, right? What does that mean? Well, we understand multiplicative scaling when it comes to a unit, but what about our entire board, right? What are the vectors in which we can actually scale the power of our entire board as opposed to just one unit? Well, there are, we can go over them one by one, right? First one, leveling, right? How many units you have on your board and how many traits you have on your board is going to affect how strong it is, right? That is one way in which you can make your board stronger. 2, items. If you reach level 10, but you don't have many items for your units, sucks. You're not going to do too well because you over-indexed onto 1. You need multiplicative scaling over there as well. You need a lot of items. 3, combat augments, right? We often enough, especially in like certain metas, fail to note the value that these can give us. However, these are the 3 like primary buckets that we're going to be talking about or like are talking about right now. Mostly because all 3 of these can be gotten or achieved in every single one of your TFT games, right? And the easiest way to do that has always been augments, right? Now, a rule of thumb that is often stated is that if you get offered 3 augments a game, you want one of them to be gold generating, ideally the first one, so that the gold can generate more gold, econ up. You need 1 combat, often said to be the last one, and you want 1 item augment. It's a general rule of thumb that you can follow every single game. Now, the reason that people often say that you should take the combat augment last is because the combat augment is going to be worth more towards the end of the game. Why is it going to be worth more towards the end of the game? Well, the reason is that if you have 8 units on your board benefiting from Giant and Mighty, that's going to benefit your board a lot more than if you picked it on 3-2 and only 6 units. That's the basic principle of it behind how much your board is actually benefiting from the combat. But more importantly, the reason that we actually want to take our combat augment last, ideally, and I say ideally because often enough this won't be the case. TFT is a game where every spot is different and there's exceptions to every rule, right? However, Another reason for which why you want to take your combat augment last is going to be the fact that if you take your item augment second, you're going to be left with 2 more neutral rounds in which you can adjust your game plans and item slams based on what items you have you got on your 3-2 augment, right? Essentially giving you more information to make sure that your item slams are much better and you're handling your item economy significantly better, right? If you take it on 4-2, well, now you've already slammed like a significant amount of your items, and maybe you end up in a situation that is not ideal, right? Now, another reason is that towards the end of the game, for like stage 4 and onwards, it ends up being very, very, very important to invest more into tempo as opposed to value, right? And the reason is simply that you end up taking more damage towards later stages of the game, right? So, where you could have easily sacked 5 rounds in stage 2, now you're hesitant to sack even 1 or 2 rounds, right? Because you're going to be taking more damage. This is why combat augments towards towards the end of the game, starting stage 4 onwards, which is what we call late game, end up being like significantly more important as well. In our current set, now there's also boons that have entered the mix, right? And the reason that encounters were so awkward is because often enough you would index your game plan around a decision that you made picking your 2-1 augment or 3-2, maybe you were re-rolling or something, and encounters or hacks or whatever you call them ended up making it kind of awkward because they would happen and then you would be like, well, I already have like 3 items slammed on my main tank and my main carry, and now I'm getting like a bunch of more items. This kind of sucks, right? This awkwardness often enough does not exist with boons, right? Sometimes it does. Sometimes you might be in an encounter where it's like Soraka and Kale, and both of the options are giving you 2 items. Can't do shit about that, right? Wrong. You can do shit about that. How can you do shit about that? Well, the good thing about gods is that we have this information of what god is playing a part in each of our games from the very start, right? And we can, now knowing what multiplicative scaling is and how it applies to our larger game plan, account for that, right? So, let's say that we're playing in an RE encounter. Actually, you know what? That's actually an exception case. I'm going to talk about that in a second. But let's take this very example, right? We know that our encounter is Kale and Soraka. So we know that this is going to be a game where items are going to be aplenty and we don't really need itemization. Well, in this case, what might be very, very good to do is get 2 econ augments, right? Now we can also think about getting 2 econ augments that scale well off of each other, right? So for example, on 2-1, if I get offered Prismatic Ticket in this portal, I might be extra incentivized to take Prismatic Ticket because now I know on 3-2, I can actually without, like if I get offered, let's say rolling for days, that gives me 10 extra rolls. I can take that without a second thought of like, oh, is my item situation going to be completely fucked this game? I know it's not going to be fucked because I'm getting a fuck ton of items from Kale and Soraka already, right? So that part of my game plan is already covered. Now I can take something, 2 options that synergize really, really well together without sacrificing other parts of my game plan, right? Now the reason I brought up Prismatic Ticket and rolling for days is because this is an interaction that all of us are very, very, very familiar with, right? Every one of us has had a game where you've taken Prismatic Ticket, gone rolling for days, and then just being like, this is fucking broken. And it is broken, right? Because instead of 10 rolls, you actually end up getting 15 rolls from your silver augment, which is 30 gold from your silver augment. The reason being that Prismatic Ticket essentially, the fact that it gives a 50% chance for an extra roll essentially makes you get 1.5x the times of rolls, right? Okay, so now what we can think about also is how multiplicative scaling is going to interact with A, the boons offered, and B, the boons, not the boons offered, the final god boons, but also the individual god, what the fuck are they called? Does anybody know? Blessings? The carousel rounds, the thing that's, whatever it is. What I wanted to discuss a little bit more is how you can actually utilize some of these to recognize when some things can become really, really broken based on just like seeing what it is, right? So essentially, I want you, like, let's do a sort of quiz. Right? Let's say our blessing is Soraka Varus, right? and our augments offered, let's say we're in a position where we're going to be loose streaking already. All right. So you have time breaker and you're going to be full opening. You know this. Your augments that are offered to you are, let's say, it's epoch, it's bodyguard training, and it's grab bag. Let's just say grab bag. I mean, I know you can't get it onto one, but let's just say cool. An item one, an econ one, and a combat one, right? What do you think? And this is an open-ended question. If anybody wants to chime in and give their reasoning, please. This is what I would like for you to do. What do you guys think would be a good pick in this situation, right? So just to repeat, Varus Soraka God encounter, we get epoch offered, we get a grab bag offered, and we get bodyguard training offered. What would you click?
I mean, I think I would just default epoch.
Default epoch? All right. Fair enough. I mean, econ 2-1 is never bad, right? Can't go wrong with it. We also see that there is no econ that is being generated largely, right? Except Varus kind of does give us a little bit of econ, right? Like Varus often enough will give us 5 gold on the stage 2 carousel, and I mean, you can get, if you want to roll, like if you want to re-roll, then you can get like resources through Varus as well. Now, granted, it's not purely econ, and it's a little bit of a risk, but yes, absolutely. Now, it's good to default that. However, one thing that we can think about is that regardless of how our game goes, both of the final boons that you get, the big blessing at the end that you get, the 4th augment, whatever the fuck you want to call it, both of those from either of these gods gives you a bunch of HP, right? It gives you a bunch. Soraka based on how much HP you've lost, and Varus based on your star level. That scales really, really, really well with bodyguard training, right? Because again, multiplicative scaling, your entire board is going to be getting a fuck ton of HP and a fuck ton of armor and MR, which makes your net effective HP on your board insane, right? Now, on a little bit of a off-tangent thing, Moltok once mentioned that late game, the most important thing that often enough happens that makes you cap your board really, really, really high is the effective HP on your board, right? His take was essentially just that late enough, most carries just deal so much damage that the only thing that matters is how long can your board actually survive for your carries to deal damage. And the longer that your frontline resiliently holds up, the better your odds of winning a fight late game are, right? Which again, I mean, just late game speaking, this becomes really, really good. Now, I think I do agree in the sense that epoch and bodyguard training are going to be generally the two that you would look at here. But the reason I mentioned bodyguard training specifically is I've been seeing a lot of people just completely discard this augment and like not think much of it because it got like a 50% nerf, right? It's 10 flat. It used to be 3 per level. Now it's 2 per level. And most people think this augment is complete garbage, but it's not. It's really good in Evelyn encounter. It's really good in Varus encounter. And it's really good in Soraka encounter for exactly these reasons. Now, I mean, I've spoken about this to Dr. Mr. and Sheepsons already because these are my students. But there's also a fundamental misconception going on when it comes to mech and how that actually functions. In fact, I'm going to close this presentation. I mean, we only have 4 slides. This is, I just wanted to like chat after that a little bit. But wait, can you guys see my tabs? You can. Okay. There's a fundamental misconception going on about mech and how like mech actually functions in current meta. A lot of the people seem to think that the reason mech is good is because anima is good, and part of that is true. But a lot of people do end up like just refusing to play mech. Like in most of my lobbies, if I see someone going mech, it's out of literally one of 2 things, which is 2-1 anima or expedition, and that's kind of it, right? There are far more spots in which you can be playing mech that a lot of people don't notice and so miss out on like free wins on, or at least like free top 4s, right? Now, because we just talked about multiplicative scaling, now we can talk about this mech stuff as well, which is essentially the reason that mech is broken is the same reason that all of these things have been, there's the same reason that power-ups were broken, it's the same reason that these things were broken on dragons, which is essentially that whenever a unit in TFT ends up getting more power given to it than a regular TFT unit does, um, it becomes immediately broken based on multiplicative scaling, this very concept, right? Which is to say that because mech has so much power already in it, like the Galio unit, Mighty Mecha, that the second that it gets any extra burst of power, the way multiplicative scaling works, it absolutely goes out of control. Now, um, just one slight pet peeve before we even get into that is everyone itemizes this mech unit wrong, and I just want to like talk about that for a second, which is that like whenever you have gargoyles to racks, do not ever slam this Titans item. It is trash. Slam second gargoyles. It is significantly better. Do not slam Titans. Absolutely ever. My students know this. I'm very pissed off about this. They know this. Declaw is also a good option, by the way, just like as a slam. But yeah, do not slam Titans. That item is dog shit. I don't know why they slam it. It literally gives only like damage amp and AP and AD. Why the fuck do you want to give that to your mech? Yeah, it gives you CC immunity, but who gives a shit about CC immunity when your mech has like infinitely more HP? It's gonna be more tanky, I promise you. Now, I want to talk about a little bit of these vectors that can allow us to play mech games outside of the obvious two, which are Anima and Expedition. Expedition basically being the stand-in for your Radiant item, right? One of them, that is an obvious one, is going to be artifacts. Now, everyone knows that artifacts are really broken on mech. We know a lot of the broken ones as well. For example, Ari's Aura and Echo's Patience on Aurelian Soul. Or on the mech, it's going to be, stuff like Steadfast Heart is good. I believe the one that pulls units in that like completely stuns you. I don't know what it's called, but I believe that one's also good. Silvermirror, Indomitable, right? Did I say Steadfast Heart earlier? Why did I say Steadfast? I meant Silvermirror Dawn, sorry. These two are supposed to be really good, yes. Mogul's Mail, of course, everybody knows. But, so artifacts also, a lot of people know already about. The next thing that people know a lot about is Yasuo hexes, which are broken, right? The 3 Yasuo hexes that you want to be on the lookout for are Cryogenic Hex, are going to be the one hex that gives you burn and wound and 18% damage on your backline carry, so that on ASOL. And the stun one, although the stun one not nearly as much. The stun one is good, don't get me wrong, but it's not good. It's good because it's overtuned. It's not good because it gives you multiplicative scaling, right? And right now I'm trying to like emphasize the point that you look for multiplicative scaling in all of your games whenever you can, and try to like fish for it, because that'll just end up netting your board strength so much more than the average, especially in situations where you're like confused and like not sure what would make your board actually stronger. Now, another one, or rather 2 more that we can look at are 2 augments. Solo Front, the one that gives you a gargoyle, and the gargoyle gets 20% bonus HP. That's really good. Find Your Center. That one also grants you, I believe that one actually grants you 25%. Yeah, 25% max health also. Again, broken, right? Now, the second we see either of these things, also cryogenic, it becomes evident why Titans is so bad in the stats, right? The second we look at what do you actually want for your mech to be strong, when we're looking at augments and stuff that gives you net HP, right? So either healing or just like HP. Both of those things are going to scale multiplicatively with armor and MR. Oh, now it's trying to make a lot of sense. Another thing that you can be looking out for that a lot of people don't know is anomaly, right? The reason being that when you look at the stats again for Aurelian Soul, the anomaly actually has exactly the same stats as Ari's Aura. Literally exactly the same. Ari's Aura, 0.49, anomaly. It's even better now. Okay. Crazy, right? Which is to say that whenever I load up into a game, right, and I see that it's like, let's say Yasuo Echo, I am leaning really, really hard into going mech. Really, really hard. And the reason is specifically that I know that like, okay, if I can get like 1 good Yasuo hex, that's all I need, because then I can guarantee an anomaly as well. And already I have 2 scaling vectors that are multiplicatively scaling my board that exponentially benefits from multiplicative scaling due to how mecha by itself functions, right? Now, going back to the concept of tempo of value when it comes to this kind of game plan, is just going to be the fact that you can only do this if you know that there is not an expedition or something player in the lobby already, right? Because you're playing for the winner. You're going to be trying to play for your board becoming so strong that eventually you snowball out of control. But if there is someone who has anima in the lobby already and stuff, then you're gonna have a bad time, because even if you get all this multiplicative scaling online, you're gonna need to keep tempo in mind, right? Which is when this game plan really, really, really cannot work.